Hello friends, welcome back to my channel, or welcome if you are new here. My name is Susie and I have been teaching hand lettering on YouTube for almost 7 years. It has been amazing, but I decided that something needed to change, and without giving too much away, I will just tell you that that change is happening right now. What is the change, you're asking? Well, we are pausing our regularly scheduled programming to go back to the basics of hand lettering, and it starts with this video. Let's call it episode 1. So if you're ready, let's jump right in. For episode 1 of Hand Lettering Basics, I want to talk to you about how to hold your brush pen, which ironically is something I'm not sure I should even be talking about because like half of the comments on this YouTube channel are people telling me that I hold my pen wrong. Okay, maybe not that much, but it has been a theme over the years. However, I thought maybe we should just get the awkwardness out of the way, talk about the elephant in the room, however you want to say it. I'm kind of kidding, but this is a really important part of hand lettering, so I wanted to address this one first. So before we talk about how to hold your pen, let's just talk about a couple of different kinds of pens that we often use in hand lettering. Pen number 1 is what I commonly refer to as a monoline pen. This sounds kind of fancy, but it literally is just a pen. It's not a brush pen. It doesn't have anything too exciting about it. It can even be a regular old ballpoint pen. But when I say monoline, I am simply referring to a pen that makes the same amount of thickness no matter how hard you press down, or at least very close to the same amount of thickness. This is different from a brush pen, and we'll get into brush pens next, but ultimately there are a lot of different pens that are considered monoline, but they all have that same characteristic of writing with about the same size thickness no matter how firmly you're writing. Pen number 2 is a brush pen. This type of pen can have bristles, it can have a felt tip, it can be large, it can be small, it can be water-based, it can be dye-based, but it's ultimately characterized by having a brush tip that creates a thicker line when you apply firm pressure and a thinner line when you apply light pressure. This is how we create that amazing brush calligraphy look. Well, it's one of the ways, but I'll get into that in another video. But I do think it's pretty safe to say that this is one of the most popular tools to create that brush calligraphy hand lettered look. And while it can be pretty tricky to learn, if you have like 21 days to practice, I think it could be much easier. All right, so on to pen number 3, which I suppose isn't as much of a pen as it is a nib holder, but I'm throwing it in this category because it's also one of the ways that we create modern calligraphy, hand lettering, whatever you might want to call it. These pens are similar to the brush pen in that with most nibs, they'll create thicker lines when you apply more pressure and thinner lines when you apply lighter pressure. Now I know we could break down these categories even more, but I think we've got a good base here. So let's just jump into how to hold your pen when hand lettering. First things first, there is a difference between the grip of your pen and the specific angle and way that you need to hold your pen when you're hand lettering. And I think this is where we sometimes get a little confused. For now, I'm going to talk to you about the grip that I use when holding a brush pen. Now, I know I'm no occupational therapist, I'm just a calligrapher, so this is my disclaimer. This is just what has worked for me over the last decade or so that I have spent doing calligraphy and hand lettering, but my grip may not be the same as your grip. So here's the thing. I mentioned that people get a little angry about how I hold my brush pen, and I get it. This is probably not the way that you were taught in kindergarten. Now, this is not like me being rebellious against my kindergarten teacher. It's just how I've always held my pen, and honestly, I don't ever remember a teacher correcting me. Over the years of mean comments, I've also heard from many of you who are teachers or in professions that deal with this, and many of you have told me that how I grip my pen is an actual grip that has a name to it. And on top of that, there are several more ways to grip a pen. Again, I'm no professional, I'm just sharing my experience, but I do know that oftentimes it's just what's comfortable for me. However, other times it's not, and when that happens, I simply switch my grip. I don't know, call me crazy, but I'm just not that worried about it if it feels comfortable for me. If you watch closely, you'll even notice in this video I switch my grip back and forth depending on what pen I'm using. Which brings me to pens. Over the years, I have found that some pens require a tighter grip and some require a looser grip. Others require a different grip because of the body of the pen, like some are wider and some are super thin. Others require me to push more firmly to achieve the look that I want, and others require a much lighter hand. All of these things and more play into the grip in which I hold my brush pen. And when it comes to grip, I'm simply not going to tell you to change your typical grip to create brush lettering. I think that you should choose the grip that you're most comfortable with and that works for you, and one that doesn't easily fatigue your hand. This is likely the one that you already use for writing, but it might not be, so I don't really think this is something that I can tell you how to specifically do. But where I do think that we can apply some specific Well, I hate to say rules because I don't really like the idea of adding a bunch of rules into our art and creativity, but let's call these best practices. I do think that a place we can apply some best practices to is the way in which you hold your brush pen. So when I say way, I mean things like angle, where your hand is positioned on the pen, and even where you hold your paper. So let me show you what I mean. When you're using a brush pen, you're going to apply more pressure to get thicker strokes and lighter pressure to get thinner strokes. You may have thought that you do this by tilting your pen upright to get those thin upstrokes, but that's actually not it at all. A good brush pen should give you a nice thick stroke when you push firmly, and it should bounce right back up into a thin stroke when you start easing up on your pressure. And this is how we get that brush calligraphy look. So in order to achieve this, I recommend holding your brush pen at about a 45-degree angle. You also want to make sure that you're not holding your brush pen too close to the tip, but that you're moving your hand up the body of the pen a bit, but not too far up where you're holding it from like the end of the pen, just a little ways up the body of the pen so that you have a nice good grip and you have some space to move that pen up and down quite a bit as you do your hand lettering. Your paper does matter here too. You don't want to have to hold your arms straight up and down when you're lettering. You'll want to tilt your paper a bit depending on whether you are a left-handed or a right-handed calligrapher. I write with my right hand, so I am going to angle my paper to the left. This will help you so that you're not using your wrist to create big motions in hand lettering. You want to be using your arms for much of these motions, not your wrist. That's not to say that your wrist will be in a completely fixed position. You can move it back and forth, especially for those small details, but when it comes to writing across the page, you want to be moving your arm for much of these motions and not your wrist. Now, when it comes to brush pens, there are so many variations and they can write so differently from one brush pen to the next. So these aren't hard and fast rules because each pen and each one of you are unique. But this is where I'd start when learning how to hold a brush pen. If you want to learn more about hand lettering using a brush pen, I created something specifically for you, and my hope is that it takes some of the difficulty out of learning the process of brush lettering. It's called 21 Days to Better Brush Lettering, and I'll leave the link below, or you can go to howtohandletter.com/21days if you want to learn more. Also, make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss episode 2 in our hand lettering basics series. I will see you there.